Welcome to the Deep Dive. We unpack stacks of sources to give you, well, the clearest, most compelling insights we can find. Today, we're plunging into the shadowy, really intriguing world of 17th century Spain. Think grand ambitions, fierce honor codes, and the ever-present shadow of the Inquisition.
Yeah, and our main source today is Purity of Blood by Arturo Pérez-Reverte, translated by Margaret Sayers Peden. It's this vivid historical swashbuckler. And what's so great about it, I think, is it takes you beyond just, dates and battles. You really feel the grit, the complex ethics of the time through the characters. It paints this amazing picture of intrigue in Madrid back then.
Right, so our mission today is to sort of peel back the layers on the political maneuvering, the personal codes, those surprising contradictions that really define this tumultuous period. It all centers around some pretty compelling characters. We'll see how loyalty, ambition, that thirst for justice played out in a world where, well, appearances often mattered more than truth. So what's in it for you, the curious learner? Think of it as a shortcut to understanding the hidden currents that shaped one of history's most dramatic empires. Let's dive in. Okay, let's start unpacking this. It begins with a discovery that sets a very dark stage. Our story opens with the chief constable, Martín Saldaña, arriving on scene. It's grim. A strangled duenna, Maria Montuenga.
That's right. She's found in a sedan chair just outside San Ginés Church. She's clutching this pouch, with money for masses, and there's a handwritten note, too.
And Saldaña himself is interesting, isn't he? The book mentions his reputation.
Yeah, exactly. He's known for this ox's pace, kind of slow in his duties, but apparently incredibly fast with a sword. And like Captain Alatriste, our main guy, Saldaña is a veteran of the Flanders Wars. Spain's endless, brutal conflicts up north, it immediately tells you Madrid is dangerous, danger behind every corner, violence is swift, often happening in the shadows, not, through proper channels.
And speaking of Alatriste, he's our central figure, stoic, scarred, sword for hire. Another Flanders veteran, known for his glacial calm, but also, surprisingly, this kind of strict moral code, which often seems to put him at odds with the world he's in. He doesn't quite fit.
No, he doesn't. And always with him is his young ward, Íñigo Balboa. He's the narrator, actually. 13 years old, a Basque lad. Very curious, maybe a bit prone to romanticizing adventure, even though he's living in this incredibly harsh reality.
Okay, so when does their world start getting really shaken up?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The famous poet, Don Francisco de Quevedo, enters the scene. Poet, satirist, swordsman too. Famous for his wit, his Santiago cross. Has a noticeable limp, but he's courageous. And he enlists Alatriste.
For what?
He needs help for a Valencian family, the De la Cruz. Their daughter, Elvira, is essentially imprisoned in this convent, the adoratresses Benitez. And the place is run by a corrupt friar, Juan Corrado, who it turns out is basically a pawn of the super-powerful Conde de Olivares.
Olivares, right. The king's favorite minister.
The very one.
But wait a minute, Quevedo. Wasn't he a proud old Christian, known for, let's say, pretty strong views against anyone with Jewish ancestry? And now he's asking Alatriste to help conversos. A family of converted Jews. That sounds like a massive contradiction. What's going on?
It absolutely is. And that's what makes it so fascinating. It gives you this incredible insight into the era's really complex honor codes and personal debts. See, the book makes it clear. Yes, 17th century Spain was obsessed with purity of blood. It was a weapon, deep-seated hatred of Jews, heretics.
Yeah.
Used all the time for persecution, social control.
Okay.
But there was also pragmatism. Quevedo's motive here actually goes back to a past connection with the Duke de Osuna, who was, believe it or not, Alatriste's father's commander. So it shows even these rigid ideals could bend for a price maybe, or for an old loyalty when things got personal. It really highlights how purity of blood was often less about real faith and more, a convenient tool for power plays, something you could set aside if money or influence was involved.
Wow. Okay, so we've got this murder mystery, this backdrop of veterans and wars, a famous poet making a very strange request, and this deep-seated religious prejudice. It's all simmering. How do these things start to connect? How does it put everyone in danger? You can already feel how politics and personal lives are just completely intertwined. A simple favor could unravel everything.
Well, the De la Cruz family's problem Elvira, stuck in that convent run by Friar Corrado, that links directly to the highest levels of power. Corrado is described as Olivares' ace card for funding the war effort. So a family's private tragedy is actually tied into the state's finances and politics.
Right, a microcosm of bigger struggles. Okay, that sets the stage. So moving on, Alatriste, Quevedo, the De la Cruz family, they come up with a plan. A risky one, I bet.
Extremely risky. They plan to extract Elvira during Mass. And Íñigo, being Íñigo, curious, maybe a bit reckless, he secretly watches the convent. He actually overhears someone saying breaking into a convent is death. He sees the strict rules, the spiked grills, even catches a glimpse of Elvira's white fingertips through the lattice.
And meanwhile, Íñigo has his own distractions.
Yes, we see his growing fascination, maybe infatuation, with Angelica de Alcazar. She's beautiful, but the book calls her evil. She's the niece of the royal secretary Luis de Alcazar. Íñigo follows her to the Acero Fountain, a known spot for intrigues, secret meetings. It shows his youthful romanticism, but it also, unfortunately, hints at his later carelessness. And she gives him this delicate little gold charm. Seems innocent, right? But it'll come back later with serious consequences.
Oh, I have a bad feeling about that. So the rescue attempt, it doesn't go smoothly, I take it.
No. It turns into a deadly ambush. Don Luis de la Cruz, Elvira's younger brother, he's mortally wounded. He actually dies in Íñigo's arms.
Terrible. Who set it up and why? Just to stop the rescue.
It was orchestrated by Luis de Alcazar, Angelica's uncle, and Fray Emilio Bocanegra. Bocanegra is the terrifying president of the Holy Office's Council of 6 judges, the Inquisition. And their motives: deeply political, very complex. It's not just stopping the rescue. They're using the whole incident to try and discredit Olivares. Remember, Friar Corodo, the convent head, is Olivares' guy, his banker's son. And importantly, they also want to settle old scores with Alatriste himself. They're basically trying to wrap it all up into a pretty package for an auto da fe.
The auto da fe, the public act of faith, part religious spectacle, part political terror tactic.
Exactly. And this is where the Inquisition's power really comes into terrifying focus. Íñigo gets captured. Gualterio Malatesta, this ruthless Italian assassin Alatriste knows from the past, grabs him, and Íñigo is taken straight to the secret dungeons of the Holy Office in Toledo.
Oh no, what happens to him there? That sounds horrific.
It is. He faces this completely opaque, terrifying interrogation. They accuse him of being a Judazizer, a conspirator, but with no clear charges, no real evidence presented, and they torture him brutally. The book mentions a bull's pizzle, a type of whip, leaves him covered in welts. But despite all that, Íñigo shows just immense courage, incredible resilience for a 13-year-old. He absolutely refuses to incriminate Captain Alatriste. His loyalty holds firm.
Wow, under torture. That's something. A powerful moment, showing his character.
Definitely. It's a stark picture of courage against this overwhelming, almost arbitrary power.
So this plunges Alatriste into, well, desperate measures, I imagine. How does he find out what's happened?
He learns about Íñigo's capture and the Inquisition's plans, first from Martin Saldaña, the constable, and later from the Conde de Guadalmedina. He's a grandee, high nobility, whose life Alatriste actually saved in battle once. Guadalmedina provides money, connections, but even he stresses how limited influence is when you're up against the Inquisition. He literally says, in dealing with the Inquisition, even venality has its limits. Corruption only goes so far.
So even the highest nobles are wary. What's the plan then? How can they possibly get Íñigo out?
This is where Quevedo steps back in, with his typical ingenuity, a really daring plan. He uses Guadalmedina's money, plus his own fame, to travel to Luis de Alcazar's hometown, back in Aragon. And there he starts searching for the Green Book. It's basically a birth registry.
Okay, what's he hoping to find?
Leverage. And boy, does he find it. Here's the bombshell. He discovers that Luis de Alcazar himself, this high court official, Order of Calatrava insignia and all, he doesn't have pure blood. His ancestors converted from Judaism way back in 1534.
Get out! This high-ranking official, persecuting others for impure blood, has Jewish ancestry himself. That's incredible leverage.
Exactly. In that society, obsessed with purity of blood for high office, making that public would utterly destroy Alcazar.
So what does Alatriste do with this information? Does Quevedo just hand it over?
Well, before Quevedo can even act on it, Alatriste, driven by this icy, hopeless rage over Íñigo being tortured, pays Alcazar a little nocturnal visit. He fully intends to kill him.
Understandable rage. Does he go through with it?
No. Alcazar, terrified, immediately uses Íñigo as a shield. He basically says, if you kill me now, nothing will save the boy. And just then, the confrontation's interrupted by Angelica, Alcazar's niece. She attacks Alatriste with this shocking ferocity, biting him, clawing, the book says, like a small blonde bulldog. He barely manages to escape.
Wow. So that must be a huge turning point for Alatriste. He's a man of direct action, a soldier. But now, killing Alcazar would actually doom Íñigo.
Precisely. It's a classic soldier's dilemma, but twisted. He realizes how complex it's become. His own instinct for revenge could make things infinitely worse. He understands that Íñigo's silence under torture is the only thing keeping the boy alive, really. Killing Alcazar throws away their only leverage. It really shows his evolution, doesn't it? He's moved beyond just being a sword for hire. He's grappling with this deep personal responsibility for Íñigo.
Okay, so the tension is just ratcheting up.
Yeah.
And it all seems to be building towards this spectacle of faith, the auto da fe.
Yes, the horrifying public auto da fe in Madrid's Plaza Mayor, a massive event. Thousands attend, even King Philip V and Queen Isabel are there. The book portrays it as a calculated political move by the more radical inquisitors, partly to undermine Olivares, but also just to hammer home the fear about purity of blood.
And Íñigo and Elvira are part of this.
They are. They're paraded in sanbenitos, those long white garments showing their penitence, or condemned. Elvira, accused of Judaizing, her fate is sealed. She's condemned to be garroted, then burned. Íñigo, because he's young, and crucially because he kept silent under torture, gets a lighter sentence. But the threat of being burned at the stake was absolutely real for him, too. It's chilling.
Just horrifying. And Alatriste is there, watching this, in the crowd.
He is. He witnesses the whole ceremony, spots Alcazar and Bocanegra looking on. But even then, his own troubles aren't over. He gets ambushed right near the plaza in a narrow alley by Gualterio Malatesta and his thugs.
Malatesta again. The assassin who captured Íñigo.
The same one. There's a brutal close-quarters fight. Alatriste manages to severely wound Malatesta. It shows that even amidst this huge public display of power, personal vendettas are playing out in the side streets.
But then there's a breakthrough for Íñigo.
Yes, Quevedo makes his move. Using the leverage that devastating evidence from the Green Book, he pressures Luis de Alcazar, forces him to arrange Íñigo's release. It's a powerful demonstration, isn't it? How information, strategically used, can be a weapon even against something as fearsome as the Inquisition.
Absolutely. Information is power. So Íñigo is freed.
He is. A debt repaid, a life spared. Íñigo is released and goes back to Alatriste's lodgings. And then there's this really surprising, poignant moment later. Alatriste actually visits the badly wounded Malatesta.
Visits him. After everything. Why?
It's complex. Despite their history, despite Malatesta capturing Íñigo, Alatriste spares his life. The source hints he sees maybe a reflection of himself, or perhaps it's seeing the woman caring for the wounded assassin. He mutters something about how even serpents seek companionship, and the room reminding him too much of his own bleak lodgings. It really challenges those simple ideas of good versus evil, shows the shades of gray these characters live in.
That is unexpected. So what about the loose ends? Friar Coroto, Angelica?
Well, Friar Coroto meets a rather mysterious end. He's killed. The official news bulletin mentions a young masked man running him through without speaking a word. The implication is pretty clear. Alatriste's influence, or maybe his blade, is still at work. Alatriste himself plans to head back to the war in Flanders. Seems like that's where he feels most at home, despite everything.
And Íñigo. How is he left after this ordeal?
He's recovering, practicing his penmanship, ironically using verses written by Quevedo. But then he sees Angelica de Alcázar again. And even after all that's happened, her diabolic expression, as the book calls it, and the memory of that charm she gave him, the one the Inquisition took as evidence, they still hold this powerful fascination for him. It really highlights how complex and often painful love and obsession can be, especially in such a harsh world, even for a young boy who's seen too much. So yeah, this deep dive, it really shows how tangled personal stories were with the big picture of 17th century Spanish politics and religion. You know, from the court's power plays right down to the brutal reality of the Inquisition, purity of blood gives us this world where just surviving often meant being cunning, courageous, and sometimes making really unexpected alliances. And behind all the grand pronouncements of faith and honor, it was often much more pragmatic things driving events, money, influence, secrets.
What really stands out is the resilience, isn't it? People like Alatriste, like Íñigo, just navigating this society that's so full of hypocrisy and danger. It makes you think. In a world where honor could be bought and sold, where justice felt like just another commodity, what actually defined a person's worth. And you have to wonder how much of that intricate dance between power, prejudice, personal conviction, how much of that still echoes today?
It absolutely raises that question. For all the noise about purity of blood, about religious fervor, the forces that really shape destiny seem far more practical. Cold, hard cash, influence, and knowing how to use secrets. Ultimately, appearances and controlling the narrative often seemed way more powerful than any claim to a moral high ground.
Yeah. Ultimately, this deep dive really reminds us that history isn't just dates and big events. It's a deeply human story, full of choices, sacrifices, and that that constant search for meaning, even when surrounded by chaos. Definitely something to mull over until our next deep dive.